The long-haul driver's ghost story, the spine-chilling haunted car. It was a cold, foggy night when Jack, a seasoned long-haul truck driver, was making his way through a deserted stretch of highway. The truck he drove was his pride and joy, a powerful, well-maintained rig that had taken him across the country countless times. But this night would be different. Jack had been driving for hours, the hum of the truck's engine and the rhythmic flashing of the headlights the only company he had. As he passed through a particularly remote area, the radio began to glitch, cutting in and out. At first, he thought it was just poor signal, but then something strange happened. The static seemed to form words. "Help me," the faint voice whispered, barely audible over the static. Startled, Jack glanced at the dashboard. His truck's lights flickered before they steadied. He chalked it up to a malfunctioning system, brushing it off as he focused on the road. But the voice persisted, this time clearer. "Help me? Please, don't leave me." His heart raced as the truck's temperature dropped and a cold draft swept through the cabin. Jack's breath became visible in the air, and the hairs on the back of his neck stood up. He glanced in the rearview mirror, but the highway behind him was empty, shrouded in the thick fog. Suddenly, the truck's engine sputtered, and the lights went out. Jack quickly pulled over, cursing under his breath. He checked the dashboard, but everything seemed normal. No warning lights, no signs of malfunction. But when he tried to restart the engine, it wouldn't budge. The truck remained eerily silent. As Jack sat there, contemplating what to do, he heard it again. A faint tapping on the window. Slowly, he turned his head. Standing in the dim light outside was a figure, cloaked in shadows. It was a man, disheveled, with hollow eyes that seemed to look right through him. The figure raised its hand, tapping on the window once more, and then mouthed something Jack couldn't hear. Fear gripped Jack's chest as he instinctively locked the doors, but the figure didn't move. Instead, it stayed there, staring, as if waiting for something. Jack's heart pounded in his ears. He had heard stories of haunted highways, of drivers who encountered ghostly figures on lonely roads. He didn't want to believe them, but this felt real. In a panic, Jack tried the ignition again. This time, the truck roared to life, and the headlights flickered back on. He slammed the gear shift into drive and sped off, not daring to look back. But as the truck rumbled down the highway, the figure was still in his mind. He could almost feel its presence, as if it were still out there, watching him. Hours passed, and the fog began to clear. Jack's hands gripped the steering wheel, still trembling from the encounter. He had no idea what had happened that night, but something had changed. His truck, his trusted companion, felt different. The atmosphere inside the cab was heavy, almost suffocating. When Jack finally arrived at his destination, he parked the truck and went to unload his cargo. But as he opened the door, he froze. There, on the passenger seat, was a faded photograph, a picture of a man who looked eerily similar to the figure he had seen on the road. The back of the photograph was inscribed with a message: "Don't let him leave. He's still out there." Jack never drove that route again. He couldn't shake the feeling that whatever had happened that night, it wasn't over. The haunted car had followed him, and the ghost of the long-haul driver was still searching for help, or perhaps something far worse. The long-haul driver's ghost story, the spine-chilling haunted car, continued. Jack, standing by the truck, felt his hands trembling. As he gripped the photo, he suddenly realized something was wrong. An eerie coldness swept over his body. He looked at the photo again, but the moment felt strangely frozen in time. There was no sound, and the truck around him felt oddly silent. After a few moments, a cold, sinister smile spread across his face, as if something within him had shifted. Still holding the photo, Jack sensed something was about to happen. The environment around him grew increasingly strange. Then, he heard it, a deep, terrifying growl coming from somewhere in the distance. He turned around, but the truck's headlights suddenly went out. His focus, however, remained on the photo. As he gazed at it, he noticed something odd. The figure in the photo, the man, appeared to be looking directly at him. Slowly, the eyes in the photo began to move, and then the figure itself began to rise. The next moment was something Jack could never have imagined. The man from the photo stepped out of the frame, his figure becoming solid and real. He began to walk toward Jack, his eyes fixed on him, his presence growing more oppressive with every step. Jack froze, unable to move or scream as the figure neared. The man reached the window of the truck and with an invisible hand, tapped on the glass. The air inside the cabin grew thick and heavy, and Jack's heart raced. He realized that this was no longer a mere apparition. The truck, his once trusted companion, had become a vessel for the very spirit of the man from the photograph. The figure's face twisted into a cold grin, and Jack understood that the spirit wasn't seeking help. No, it was claiming him, pulling him into its realm, never to be free again. His attempts to scream were futile, his voice lost in the suffocating air around him. As Jack tried to move, he felt as though something was holding him in place. His feet seemed rooted to the floor, unable to break free. The truck itself felt like it was closing in on him, trapping him within its dark, haunted interior. Time seemed to stretch and warp as Jack struggled. The figure stood motionless outside, staring into the truck with an almost knowing gaze, as if it were waiting for something to finally break. And then, the truck went silent. The engine, once humming with life, now lay dead. Jack tried one final time to open the door and escape, but it was no use. He felt the cold, ghostly presence wrapping around him like a vice. By morning, the truck was found parked at the side of the road, but Jack and his vehicle were nowhere to be found. There was no sign of struggle, no clue to their disappearance. Days later, rumors spread. On the night that Jack and his truck vanished, something darker than just a ghost had taken hold of him. Some say, if you pass by that stretch of highway today, you can still hear the faint sound of a truck's door rattling in the wind, followed by the eerie echo of a long-haul driver's cry for help. And in the chilling mist, a shadow lingers, waiting for the next soul to claim. The long-haul driver's ghost story, the spine-chilling haunted car, final part. As time passed, the story of Jack and his haunted truck became a local legend. The stretch of highway where he vanished was marked with an eerie reputation, and drivers who dared to pass through at night often reported strange occurrences. Some spoke of cold gusts of wind that seemed to come from nowhere, while others heard faint whispers on the wind, calling their names. But the most unsettling of all were the reports of a truck that could be seen driving along the road, only to disappear into the fog when approached. A year after Jack's disappearance, a new driver, Dave, fresh off his training, was assigned to take the same route. He had heard the rumors but dismissed them as mere superstition. On his first night driving the lonely stretch of road, he felt confident and assured, certain there was no such thing as ghosts. However, as he approached the spot where Jack's truck had vanished, a sudden chill filled the air. His truck's headlights flickered, and the radio, once silent, suddenly crackled to life. "Help me! Help me!" The voice was faint but unmistakable, pleading and desperate. Dave's heart skipped a beat. He adjusted the radio, hoping it was just a malfunction, but the voice continued, growing louder, more urgent. The temperature inside the cab dropped dramatically, and his breath turned to mist. His hands tightened around the wheel as the truck started to slow down on its own. Suddenly, the figure appeared in the headlights. It was Jack, or what remained of him. His hollow eyes stared back at Dave from the fog, his face pale and twisted with agony. He seemed to be reaching out to him, as if pleading for release. Dave's pulse raced, and he slammed his foot on the gas, speeding past the figure. But the shadow seemed to follow him, keeping pace with the truck no matter how fast he drove. The temperature continued to plummet, and the voice echoed in his mind, urging him to stop. But Dave wouldn't. He couldn't. Eventually, after what felt like hours, the truck's engine sputtered and died, and Dave was forced to pull over. The fog was thick, and the world outside the truck was swallowed by an impenetrable darkness. With trembling hands, Dave grabbed his phone to call for help, but the screen was blank. No signal. In that moment, Dave knew he wasn't alone. He could feel the weight of the presence beside him, in the passenger seat, cold and suffocating. The whisper grew louder, now unmistakably clear. "You can't escape," it hissed. Dave bolted from the truck, his legs shaking beneath him, and began to run through the fog. But it felt as though the fog itself was closing in on him, blocking his way. The sound of footsteps echoed behind him, and when he turned, there was nothing. Only the sound of Jack's desperate voice growing fainter with each step. In the distance, he could just make out the faint glow of headlights. A passing car. Without thinking, Dave ran towards the lights, desperate to escape the nightmare. But when he reached the road, the car was gone, vanished as quickly as it had appeared. He was alone again. The next morning, the truck was found on the side of the road, abandoned. Dave was nowhere to be found. The authorities searched, but there was no sign of him. Some say he vanished into the fog, just as Jack had. Others believe he was claimed by the restless spirit of the long-haul driver, bound to the highway forever, just like those before him. To this day, locals avoid that stretch of road at night, warning newcomers of the haunted highway. And every now and then, a passing driver swears they see the flicker of headlights in the fog, accompanied by the sound of a truck's engine idling in the distance, followed by the soft, mournful cry of a driver lost to the shadows. And somewhere out there, in the depths of the night, the haunted car waits for its next victim, ever hungry, ever restless.